Hello, everybody. This video is going to be covering the topic of using language. So to start us off, we're going to consider meaning of words. First off, with denotative meaning. Denotative meaning is the literal dictionary meaning of a word or phrase. So just take it from pretty much the book. There isn't any emotion, there isn't any interpretation involved. Whereas with connotative meaning, this is meaning that's suggested by associations with the word or the idea or emotions that are triggered by that word or phrase. So you're looking at more of the subjective interpretation of a word or phrase rather than just the dictionary definition. There are a few guidelines to follow as you're using language. Number one, use language accurately. Be sure that the words that you use are correct. Obviously, if you use a word and it isn't according to the actual definition, that will cause some confusion. Use language clearly. So you want to use familiar and concrete words, and you want to make sure to eliminate any clutter. Keep it very simple. You want to use language vividly, be very expressive, and we're going to get into this more later in this presentation. And then use language appropriately, which we will also get into some more later. So imagery is one of the ways that you can help make your language more vivid within your speech. Imagery is the idea that you are creating mental images of objects, actions, or ideas. So describing them in a way that someone can picture that scenario in their head, give them that mental image. In terms of abstract words, this is something you want to avoid as you're trying to use vivid language. Abstract words are references to very general concepts, qualities, or attributes. There's not a lot of specificity. Instead, use concrete words. Concrete words are references to tangible objects, things that people can picture specifically. So it's not this nebulous concept that people are struggling to actually imagine in reality or in their mind. So if we look at this idea of the spectrum of abstract to concrete, we can look at physical activity as a very abstract phrase or word. And as we get further towards concrete, we then could say sports would be a little more concrete than physical activity. Basketball would be more concrete than sports. Professional basketball would be more concrete than just basketball. We can see, obviously, there's a lot more interpretations of basketball than there are professional basketball. And then even more concrete, we could go on to the level of Steph Curry. So there we're talking about an individual that participates in professional basketball, which is a sport and is also a physical activity. So something much more concrete rather than that abstract, if you say, we're going to be discussing a physical activity today, everybody would be like, huh? I'm not really sure where we're going with this. So being concrete is critical. So now we're going to jump into a few other examples of the way that you can make your language vivid. Simile is one of the ways in doing so. You can compare something, and you generally introduce that, or you do introduce that, qualifying it with like or as. So you compare it, it's as bright as a summer's day. That would be a simile. And please don't can't guarantee I can give you an example in every one of these, but similes are pretty basic. Oh, we have examples. I forgot. With eyes glued on their phones, pedestrians walk the streets like zombies after the apocalypse. So we see that direct correlation using like in this case. A metaphor, on the other hand, is similar to a simile, but it's a comparison that doesn't introduce the words like or as. So an example, America's cities are the windows through which the world looks at American society. So we're using cities to describe windows or vice versa. So there's still that comparison, but we're not using like or as. You can also use rhythm, which is the pattern of sound that's created by choice. You do that intentionally and through the arrangement of words that you use. Obviously, I don't have an example there, but there's a lot of them that you can always look up without these examples in the presentation to give you a better idea of what you can do with that. And there are also examples in your textbook. Parallelism is when you have a similar arrangement or a pair of, of a pair or series of related words, phrases, or sentences. So an example, I'm looking at our textbook, we have rich and poor, intelligent and ignorant, wise and foolish, virtuous and vicious. So we see we have that pairing or arrangement of words, and it's repeated throughout to give that parallel feel to it. And there it is. I jumped ahead of myself. I apologize, guys. Repetition is reiterating the same word or set of words. And that's a really big one, especially in some very, very, notable speeches like I have a dream. Generally, it's located at the beginning or the end of successive clauses or sentences. So an example is, if you want wellness with wealth, come to India. If you want health and wholeness of life, come to India. If you want prosperity and peace, come to India. So there we see that repetitive clause that comes at the beginning of each of those sentences. Alliteration, I love alliteration, is repeating the initial consonant in close or adjoining words. So using words or that are repeated, words 1, 2, 3, 4, that all start with the same letter. I'm particularly very fond of words that start with vowels. So an example, though, is nothing great is accomplished without cooperation, compromise, and common cause. So here we see we've got a lot going. It's obvious that there's an alliteration with cooperation, compromise, and common cause, all that, the C words, but we also actually see it sort of snuck in with the word accomplished. So it gives that rhythm that we were talking about earlier and really punches it up as you're delivering your speech. An antithesis is the juxtaposition of ideas, usually in parallel structure. An example is, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So sort of flipping it on its head and rephrasing it as that juxtaposition. So now we come to a little bit more in depth on the appropriate language portion of things. As you are choosing the language that you're using in your speech, you want to take into consideration the occasion in which you're speaking or at the event which you're speaking, the audience that's going to be in attendance, the topic, whether it's of the event overall or your speech, and then the speaker that's actually delivering it, and whether you're, well known, what have you. So one of the very critical components of appropriate language is making sure that you are providing inclusive language. First of all, inclusive language does not stereotype, it does not demean on the basis of gender, race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, all of that, because that's one of the first things that's going to turn your audience immediately away from your speech, is if you aren't providing inclusive language or you're intentionally violating this basic tenet of speaking. You need to make sure that you are inclusive of all of those types of groups. Some of the other guidelines that you should try to follow as much as possible as you're framing your speech, try to avoid the generic he as you're writing. Use a they or a he/she if necessary. Avoid man when you're actually referring to both men and women. Avoid stereotyping jobs according to gender or social roles by gender. Make sure that you use names. My goodness, I don't even know what I was writing there. Use the names that the groups actually use themselves, there we go, to identify themselves. So if they have already said, this is what we prefer to be referred to, then you should most definitely follow along there. So here are some examples. An ineffective example of avoiding the generic he is each time a surgeon walks into the operating room, he risks being sued for malpractice. Instead, try each time a surgeon walks into the operating room, he or she risks being sued for malpractice. In terms of the avoiding the generic man, an ineffective example is if a large comet struck the earth, it could destroy all of mankind. And that's one of those we actually hear pretty commonly, right? The mankind word. Instead, try if a large comet struck the earth, it could destroy all human life, making sure that it's inclusive. In terms of avoiding stereotyping, an ineffective example is being a small businessman in the current economic climate is not easy. We can see there it says businessman. So it has to be a man? No, we want to instead say being a small business person in the current economic climate is not easy. So more inclusive in terms of broadening it to both men and women. Using self-identifiers. The Paralympics show what handicapped people, the Paralympics show what handicapped people can accomplish in the athletic arena is not necessarily a very effective statement. Instead, try the Paralympics show what people with disabilities can accomplish in the athletic arena. So just that slight adjustment makes it more inclusive. So that is the end of this particular presentation. As often is the case, there are some videos in the PowerPoint presentation in Moodle that can give you a little bit more information, provide those video examples of some of the things that we've covered in this particular presentation. So I encourage you to make sure that you review those, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful week. Thank you.